How's that for a slice of fried gold?
Why don't we just wait here for a while? See what happens.
There's no more room in hell. The dead will walk here.
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
Of your favorite cult films.
Pink and the Stink.
The Pink and the Stink.
Really,
two in the Pink, though.
Just lean
only
in.
one in the Stink.
Cinema shocker. You'll never see us coming. These ad reads are going to be great. All right. Well, hello and welcome.
Are we recording? Are we recording? Man, I should pay attention to that the corner of the screen that says that.
Yeah, but I'm real jacked up because you didn't put the intro thing you had from the last one on this one, and so I didn't notice that until right now.
You didn't have it memorized yet?
No, I didn't have it mineralized.
Mineralized. Do we need to start this over, Gary?
Well,
Are you
hello
okay?
and welcome to Cinema Shock. It's a podcast dedicated to the history and evolution of cult and genre movies. I'm Gary Horne.
I'm Justin Bishop, and we are joined once again this week. We are joined by a very special guest, writer, comedian, and teen vampire expert, Todd A. Davis.
It's a podcast, you guys. Welcome. It's a podcast.
Oh, you want me here for the sex, don't you?
I'm definitely the vampire expert here.
Oh man, what an awkward line! What an awkward way to propose sex with a person by saying, "You want me here for the sex,
The sexy stuff.
You want me here for the sexy stuff."
The sexy stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he's no Edward Cullen. Let's just say that. He is. So hey.
We're talking about.
This is part 2 of our George Romero, Tom Savini series. It's going to last till Thanksgiving or so, probably. I'm not joking. These guys did a lot of movies together.
Oh,
so we are going through basically every film that George Romero and Tom Savini worked on together, which is a lot. I mean, so here's how this started. When we were talking about starting this podcast, we're like, I said I really want to do some Tom Savini movies in October for Halloween. We want to do some horror movies for Halloween. And they're like, well, we can't talk about Tom Savini without talking about Dawn of the Dead. If you're going to talk about Dawn of the Dead, you just got to talk about all of George Romero's zombie movies, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So we're like, okay, we'll do the zombie movies first. That'll be kind of an introduction. Then we'll go into the Tom Savini. But then we're just like, what the hell? Let's merge the two ideas and let's do every movie that George Romero and Tom Savini worked on together. So that's why. Honestly, that's an explanation why this series is going on for as long as it's going to go on. Is because we basically took two ideas, mashed them together like chocolate and peanut butter.
Mm-hmm.
Tom Savini's the peanut butter. George Romero's the chocolate. And this podcast is your Reese's Cup. I don't know where I'm going.
This
with
is
that.
going great
You're
so far.
you're on a roll. I was
feel like you're nailing
I was totally on board with it.
So last week we talked about Night of the Living Dead. So we went through a little bit of Romero's history post Night of the Living Dead. We talked a little bit about the movies that he did immediately after that, which were not necessarily traditional horror films. nor were they very successful or as well received by critics as Night of the Living Dead, which of course was a major, not only success, but a major piece of the zeitgeist at the time. It was a huge hit. So his next three films after Night of the Living Dead were 1971's There's Always Vanilla, 1972's Jack's Wife / Hungry Wives / Season of the Witch, depending on where you're reading about it. It was called Season of the Witch later because they wanted to like shoehorn that Donovan song into the soundtrack, so they just renamed the movie after it. And then in 1973, he did The Crazies. Now, of those, only The Crazies has really gone on to have any kind of major cult following. Most people who watch There's Always Vanilla or Season of the Witch are really only watching it because they're Romero completists. But The Crazies, although it was not terribly successful at the time, has gone on to have, people know The Crazies and they enjoy it. And it has a following. And I mean, hell, it even had a very well received, from what I remember, remake back in 2010, which is actually a pretty solid movie if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, I think we saw it in the theaters.
Yeah, I mean, Brett Eisner, I think, directed it. But I remember it being pretty good. It's got Timothy Olyphant, who we all love in it. Anyway, this is not a podcast about The Crazies. But although it was mostly ignored upon release, the original Crazies did lead to a lucrative new partnership for George Romero. So while he was in New York, he was promoting that film, and he did an interview with a writer this guy who was writing for a filmmakers magazine named Richard Rubenstein. And Rubenstein, he was writing, but he really wanted to like produce actual films. So him and Romero became friends. And then at one point, Rubenstein just said to Romero, he said, hey, let's take a little breather. Romero's had 4 movies in a row that were all very difficult. Night of the Living Dead, very difficult because it was just a 7-month exhaustive shoot. But then the other ones were more difficult really in their release. He wasn't happy with the experience. So he was getting a little burned out.
Yeah,
so,
I was watching sorry to jump in there, but the commentary track for the Dawn of the Dead, Richard Rubenstein tells a story about Romero was under serious debt during this time. Like he had all these back-to-back failures in movies.
I think the Latent Image was in pretty dire straits financially.
Yeah, and Rubenstein was like actually trying to give Romero advice to like declare bankruptcy and start over. And Romero refused because he felt like it was inappropriate to back out on the people that had loaned him money and helped him out. And investments and that sort of thing. And Rubenstein had a lot of respect for that Romero was just like so adamant about not walking out on those people. So he partnered up with him so that he could help him get out of debt. Now, this was their first film together, obviously, but Dawn of the Dead's really going to be the one we'll talk about more on that. But yeah, I
mean, this wasn't their first collaboration though. So what they did to take that breather from feature filmmaking is the two of them spent the next 3 years working in television. They did a lot of documentaries, a lot of sports documentaries, including a pre-murderer O.J. Simpson documentary called O.J. Simpson Juice on the Loose, which is the Cardi B's next single.
So ended up sticking with, I was about to say still sticking with horror, but just, either way. People make fun of poor Ben Shapiro, but a bucket and a mop is a lot of juice on the loose. I'm just saying.
So working in this area of the business helped him to learn the ins and outs of real filmmaking, as opposed to like the kind of guerrilla independent stuff he'd been doing, what he called trunk of the car garage filmmaking in Pittsburgh. So while these projects, doing documentaries and things like that, sports shows, these kind of seem like mundane, boring things for a guy of Romero's talents to be doing, but they did sort of serve as cinematic stretch exercises for him. Excuse me?
Cinematic kegels.
Yes.
Somewhat.
Okay. Thank you, Gary. We're making a lot of vagina jokes in the first 5 minutes of this episode.
I apologize. Sorry.
But this eventually led to Romero and Rubenstein forming the Laurel Group, and they had plans for several feature films when they put this group together. And the first of those features was his 1978 Is He or Isn't He a Vampire movie, which is the movie we're talking about today, Martin.
My name is Martin. I'm 84 years old. People think I'm crazy when I tell them how old I am. I'd like to be normal. I just have a sickness. The only way I can survive is by drinking blood. It's not easy living the way I do. I have to be careful all the time. But I'm pretty good at it. I think as I get older, I get better. I haven't been caught yet.
Martin, another kind of terror.
See, people don't understand what's wrong. They think that I'm a monster. They think I'm a vampire. People don't realize that those things they see in the movies are not real. I don't have a whole lot of women. It's nice to watch them. I watch them a lot all the time. I have to be sure that nothing goes wrong. I follow them. I plan. I'm very careful. I have needles now. I can use them. I can put them to sleep. And it doesn't hurt.
Martin, another kind of terror.
I would like to be like everyone else. I have to do things that I don't necessarily like to do. But I want to stay alive. I do need blood.
From the director of Night of the Living Dead. Martin, another kind of terror.
All right, so oh my God, Gary. That's more you got to edit out.
No, I'm going to leave that in. That's Martin. WZUP was the what?
I thought we got that joke out of our system at the end of the
Gina.
I thought we were done with that joke.
No, how could you be?
So before we continue, I would like to credit my sources on this. The first one is a book called Savini, the biography by Tom Savini, which would actually make it Savini, the autobiography, but that's not the name of it. Really good. It came out last year. It's a fairly recent book. Lots of great color pictures from his personal collection. It goes through his whole career. It's really cool. Plus a book, it's an ebook called Martin by a writer named Jez Winship, which is basically this like 100-page plus analysis of the movie. But it's got a lot of really, interesting behind the scenes information as well. So that was a really good source as well. Based on a script by Romero himself, Martin kind of sprang from the idea that the literary monsters, the classics, the Frankensteins, the Invisible Man, these were extensions of our own shattered psyches. In a 1981 interview with the Twilight Zone magazine, this is what Romero said.
Martin is designed to show that all the supernatural monsters that are part of the literary tradition are, in essence, what the fuck is that word? Expurgations?
Expurgations.
I've literally never heard that word in my entire life. So, sorry, I'm the asshole, I guess.
Romero's smarter than you, Gary.
Expurgations of ourselves. They're beasts we've created in order to exorcise the monster from within us. I tried to show in Martin that you can't just slice off this evil part of ourselves and throw it away. It's a permanent part of us, and we better try to understand it. Is that great? So it's like the Mummy is really just a bandaged up dude, and the Wolfman's somebody who's extra hairy, and Frankenstein, he's figure it out. But the thing is that he's just. What?
He's not being literal.
No, I think he is.
So he had the idea for Martin.
This is a great time to talk about our sponsor, manscaped.com. You don't want to be a wolf man. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I keep cutting you off, buddy.
You do, Gary. You're a bad co-host.
I'm excited about today. I'm just excited about this whole thing.
I'm glad you're excited, Gary. So Romero had the idea for Martin while he was waiting on a deal to come through for his next Living Dead film. They were actually already trying to get Dawn of the Dead made, and that one was going to be shot on a much bigger budget than anything he'd done before. But in the meantime, while he was waiting on that funding to come through, he raised the funds for this little vampire movie idea he had, which is about $250,000, which is still higher than his previous 4 films. But that number is questionable, the $250,000. So Rubenstein would later in interviews, he would say that he reported the budget as $250,000, but the actual budget was only about $100,000. He didn't want anyone to think that they could just commission a film for $100,000 and get it made. So he inflated the number to what he considered a more reasonable amount for an independent film to be made.
You know what?
Which is
go ahead,
weird, but you know.
No, what I was going to say is it's interesting because like I didn't realize this until I was watching Joe Bob did a marathon here recently, or a double feature, and it was Hatchet was one of the movies, and they had Adam Green on there, and Joe Bob actually made this joke in the film right before, and then Adam Green like confirmed it. It was like, whatever you see in like IMDb as the budget of a movie, he was like, it is always 50% of that. He said that's generally the case. They always, it's like now like a common occurrence to like just build on whatever the budget says, so it just sounds better or something.
But you would think that they would want it to sound lower to make it sound like their movie made more money or something, right? I mean,
you would think so, but yeah, like they were talking to him about Hatchet, and no, it wasn't Hatchet. It was the Victor Crowley movie, and so they said the budget on Hatchet was like $165,000, and Adam Green was like sitting there, and he's like, "What? What the hell?" He was like, "You know, I'm not allowed to discuss the budget, but it was like he just like mouthed like 50,000. It looked like, but he said, yeah, that's 100% true. They always say like IMDb seems to always at least double the amount that a movie cost."
Huh? Interesting.
I wonder if that's production and marketing, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So Romero, he had this idea in his head for a while, the idea for Martin, but in his original script for this, Martin was an older and very much a real vampire. It was very blatant that he was a real vampire, just, you know, an old, you know, ancient vampire trying to get along in the modern world. But he changed that when he cast John Amplas in the role. This is John Amplas' first feature film role, and Romero essentially rewrote the role for Amplas after he saw him perform in a local play there in Pittsburgh.
Supposedly, like it was originally like a short he had done for his friend Ray Lane, who was another one of their college buddies, and it was for his reel. And the whole story was based around the 1962 movie David and Lisa, and that was like kind of the idea for the story. And he says you can still watch it and see that that's essentially what this story sort of is, but yeah, then they decided to expand it into a feature, and he even got into he called it the dreaded narration to like try to extend it out into like a full feature length.
Yeah, the original version of this movie had narration, and I think the original cut was like almost 3 hours long.
Yeah, which is
when they first cut this.
Oddly enough, this one feels that long.
Damn it!
No. Oh no!
Yeah.
Oh no! I knew Todd wasn't going to like this movie, Gary. I had higher hopes for you. So Martin was filmed on 16 millimeter in the Pittsburgh suburb of Braddock, Pennsylvania. This was the summer of 1976. Very small crew, and when I say small, I mean like actors are having to carry the lighting rigs around the studio, around the set, which the set was like a house of another local filmmaker that they let him borrow, and the dude's grandmother was like there and making meals for the whole crew and everything. Like a very, very much a small independent family affair. I mean, this was as independent a film as George Romero had made even on his previous 4 films. And he cast a lot of locals in roles in this as well, a lot of family members, friends. He wrote, for instance, the role of Christine for Christine Forrest, who he was in love with, who by the time they were filming, he was dating. She plays Martin's cousin in the film, and they would later be married for years and years. But they also like did this sort of guerrilla filmmaking thing on this movie where they were probably shooting without a permit. They were shooting all around, trying to capture the local color in Braddock, from parades to burnout churches to just like drunk people walking around who were not necessarily part of the production. And a lot of these locations, well, all of these locations were shot by cinematographer Michael Gornick. And this was the first time that Romero had relented camera duties to somebody else. Gornick had been working with the Latent Image since the early 70s, And he was kind of the ideal choice to shoot Martin because he grew up in the area. His family, he was from Pittsburgh. His parents actually were from Braddock. So he grew up around this and saw firsthand the town's sort of descent into the decay that we see in the film. Now, Romero did have one major clash on the set with Rubinstein. See, Romero wanted to shoot the film in black and white. They ended up shooting it in color. Rubinstein refused to let him shoot it in black and white, but Romero still sort of had the intention of releasing it in black and white, but would shoot it on color for marketing purposes. His plan was to shoot it in color and then convert it to black and white for the final film. But in the final cut, of course, only Martin's fantasy dream sequences are in black and white.
Has Romero commented on why he thought it would have been better in black and white?
I think he was just trying to evoke those classic horror movies, honestly.
Yeah, I think you're right.
We talked about last week that black and white was partially an aesthetic choice on Night of the Living Dead as well, in addition to budgetary.
Yeah, Romero's very, he's so down to earth with what he does, and he's almost humble to a fault, on just passing off stuff. I saw some interviews with one with Guillermo del Toro, actually interviewing him and stuff like that. And Guillermo del Toro is trying to get him to admit to the Pittsburgh setting for a lot of the movies. Well, you bring cinema verite to horror, with what you do. And, you start from the ground and build up as far as the way your horror stuff, and setting it in Pittsburgh makes it believable. And they talk about Hitchcock had a quote called, or that said, if it happens anywhere, it happens nowhere. So he's this makes it more special. And Romero's yeah, but we just kind of shoot with what we got.
Yeah, he's very self-defacing. Romero's very modest, I guess you could say, in his commentaries and everything. He also talks about when people talk about little moments in the film, in this film, but in other films where it just seems like really great choices. He's just man, I just shot a shit ton of footage and put it all together for what works. He doesn't, and he does shoot a lot of footage purposely, because Romero is a hell of an editor. And so what he likes to do is just shoot a lot of stuff, and then he has a lot of choices for what to use in the final film. But saying that, trying to say that as if it's not a big deal, you're still the one making the choices for what to put in the film, what shots to use,
right?
Which is a talent that a lot of people do not have.
So when I saw him talk about the black and white thing, the reason I thought of that is he was just kind of yeah, I just always saw it in black and white. That's the way I saw it. And then obviously the producers didn't want that, and it was a battle I started to have, but then I was just kind of whatever. And I think that was actually in the interview with Guillermo del Toro, because del Toro is kind of asking, he's Romero's saying see, you're probably in a position that you get to fight it. It's you get to fight back with him. And del Toro's well, to the extent that there's the money for it or something, they're having that discussion. And Romero's yeah, he's I still had nothing, no power on anything. And they were no, color's the way to go. And I just had to go with it. He said now he looks at it and feels color was the right way to go. He did say that. He said he felt that it is better that it's in color. But he said just at the time, he just had always pictured it that way, and it didn't work out. He told a story. It was but he's I didn't have any authority. He's later on, we're going to go down the road to Monkey Shines. And he was I was making that, and I had a whole different ending planned out for that. And the producer didn't like it. And then I was well, F it, I'm going to make my own ending for Monkey Shines. And the producer was well, that's cool. You go ahead and make your own ending for Monkey Shines, and this movie will make its premiere in flight somewhere above Australia or something.
Wow.
Oh, perfect.
Well, I think, honestly, I agree that shooting it in color was probably the best choice, simply because I think the juxtaposition of the color and black and white scenes works really well. And obviously you wouldn't have that if the whole thing was in black and white. So aside from that disagreement with Rubinstein, though, the shoot seemed to go very smoothly. Everyone seemed to have a great time making this movie. Like I said, it was very much a family affair. They were living in this, old grandma's house in Braddock, Pennsylvania, eating family style around a table. Everyone was friends with each other. Seemed very congenial, much more so than the set of his previous films, even Night of the Living Dead, which, as we talked about, was somewhat stressful at times. But there was one very significant thing that happened during the creation of this movie. And I don't think it's hyperbole to say that this is a decision, this is an event that changed the face of the horror genre as we know it. And that is that this was the first collaboration between George Romero and Tom Savini.
God bless him, that Tom Savini.
You did it again, Tom.
Tom, you bastard.
So,
Sex Machine.
He said
that's his name.
This is
Sex
the
Machine.
start of a beautiful friendship, and we're about to get into Tom Savini. So if you're listening to this somehow and you don't know who Tom Savini is, I feel
You're about to learn.
You're about to learn.
You're about to learn.
Another funny story I heard that I just throw in here is that Romero said Tom Savini would have been the only guy he ever worked with from this moment on, except for later on Land of the Dead. The production company or the main company didn't want Savini on the picture because Savini
Didn't want him.
They didn't want him because he acts like this is literal. Said Savini had no assets and they needed to have somebody they could sue if they needed to. So that's why they went to Greg Nicotero started becoming his guy.
Wow, which is we'll talk about Nicotero probably more next week, but Greg Nicotero's owes his career to Tom Savini.
Yeah.
So that's the ironic part of that. So Thomas Vincent Savini was born on November the 3rd, 1946 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He's the youngest of 6 siblings. He's like 13 years younger than his next oldest sibling. He was like the whoops accident, Todd, you know about this.
Yeah, I'm an accident baby.
I don't think you get to knock out 6 and then keep saying whoops.
Well, no. The first five were intentional. Then 13 years later, here comes baby Tommy.
I'm just saying by 6, you know how the fuck it works.
Yeah, they were Catholic though.
Okay.
So it's a Catholic family, so probably no contraceptives. I mean, his mother was older, so maybe they just thought it wasn't going to happen at this point. But because if
you use contraceptives, guys, we're all in the Bible Belt. If you use contraceptives, you go to hell.
That's true. It says it in the Bible.
Yep.
I remember that from Sunday school.
No birth control. No condoms.
He was raised in a traditional Catholic Italian family, and which you would think would mean that he was like sheltered and not able to, because you hear this sometimes, like Wes Craven was raised in like a Southern Baptist family or something, or maybe not Southern Baptist, but like a Baptist family, and not allowed to see movies till he was like an adult. But that wasn't the case with Savini. Savini became enamored by the movies at a pretty early age. And on Saturdays, he lived in this Little Italy neighborhood of Pittsburgh, and there's a little neighborhood theater, and he would go down to watch horror movies during the Saturday matinees. Nice. And then one of those Saturdays, he saw a movie that changed his life. It was a movie called Man of a Thousand Faces. Now, Man of a Thousand Faces is a film came out in 1957. It's about the life of silent film movie actor Lon Chaney. Of course, the father of Lon Chaney Jr., who would go on to play the Wolfman and several other significant horror roles in the 1940s. In this movie, which is a biography, it is Lon Chaney's played by James Cagney, famous gangster movie actor. Mm-hmm. Savini saw this movie and it blew his mind. He'd always loved monsters. He'd always loved monster movies, but he kind of saw them as like, these are real monsters. He was so young that he didn't quite understand the divide between reality and fantasy. When he saw a monster on a screen, they were a monster. But when he saw this movie, it was his first notion that these movies were being crafted by someone behind the scenes. That these monsters that had scared them for his entire life were the work of craftsmen. And, of course, Lon Chaney was the grandfather of all of these craftsmen as far as makeup effects go. See, so if you're not familiar with the career of Lon Chaney, first of all, you should be. If you're a fan of horror movies, then the entire genre owes so much to Lon Chaney. He was a fixture in the early days of the horror genre. He started in silent horror films like The Hunchback of Notre Dame, The Phantom of the Opera in 1925, which was technically, I mean, if you're tracing like the horror output of Universal, which included, you know, Dracula and Frankenstein, etc., The Phantom of the Opera is what started that. It was the first like true Universal horror movie. Yep. And the most notable thing about Chaney was not his ability to play, or was not, I should say, not only his ability to play these tortured, grotesque characters, but it was his ability to turn himself into them. Because Chaney became known not only as a powerful and versatile character actor, but he became known as a well-regarded makeup artist as well. See, makeup effects in the early days of movies was, I mean, practically non-existent, with the exception of fake beards and mustaches. That's about as far as they got during Lon Chaney's day. This is before, you know, Frankenstein's monster became such an iconic thing. In the time that Lon Chaney was making movies in the 20s, makeup departments didn't even exist. Like, the actors were responsible for putting their own makeup on. And that went, you know, that was kind of standard up until the mid 1920s. So Chaney's ability to create these incredible looking prosthetics, not only create them, but put them on himself, made him very highly sought after. He was a highly sought after commodity in horror films. And many of those characters that he created, especially those of Quasimodo and the Phantom, remain iconic to this day. Like, if you think of Phantom of the Opera, a lot of times the image that is conjured up in your mind is Lon Chaney's version, you know, with the upturned nose that looks kind of like a skull. London After Midnight, his makeup from that, it's a lost film, but it's a very iconic image. For an image to be that iconic in a movie that nobody that's alive probably has seen is pretty amazing. So seeing this movie, when Tom Savini went to see this movie, it kind of flipped a switch in Savini's brain. He now understood where these monsters came from, and he wanted to be the guy who made them. So he starts learning from every resource he can. He goes to the library, picks up books about makeup effects. He eventually, he doesn't have the money to go buy the stuff. He finds out that there's a store in downtown Pittsburgh that sells, you know, theatrical makeup, but downtown Pittsburgh, from where he lived at this time, like, may as well have been the moon. Like, you know, going downtown and having the money to buy this stuff was, he's a poor kid in a poor neighborhood. So he saves up enough change to buy a little shoe shine kit, and he starts shining shoes and saves up enough money to go to this store downtown and buy the stuff that he needs to start creating makeup effects of his own. And so he does it, and he starts experimenting on himself first, like, you know, creating makeup effects on his own face, and then on some of his friends who were willing to participate. He would, you know, he'd be known as the guy who would run around with like scars on his face, or his friends would come home to their parents and they'd have like a bloody like fucking wound in their head, and their parents would freak out for a minute. And then they'd be like, oh, it's Savini. And then they weren't allowed to hang out with Savini anymore. You know, he was that kid.
Nice.
Then eventually he discovered his other passion, which was acting. So in high school, he was very active in high school. He was on the wrestling team. He was in the band. He was on the track team, but he was most involved in the theater in high school. And his high school theater put on these productions, a lot of musicals, Guys and Dolls, Bye Bye Birdie, stuff like that. And all of the directors, set designers, and choreographers on these plays came from Carnegie Mellon University, where they were students. So, and if you remember from last week's episode, one notable graduate of Carnegie Mellon, which it was called Carnegie Tech at the time, was a budding filmmaker by the name, of course, George Romero. So one day, Savini finds out that this guy Romero, this local filmmaker, is coming to school to audition some students for a film that he's about to make. And Romero, of course, this is pre-Night of the Living Dead. Romero is an unknown, you know, nobody knows who he is, but he's a filmmaker. Everybody wants to be in a movie. So this local filmmaker is going to make a movie, and everyone wants to be a part of it. You know, it's your chance to be famous. And that was a movie called Wine of the Fawn. We talked a little bit about it last week. We know that it never got made, but this meeting when Savini auditioned for this was the first time that Savini was introduced to Romero. And it's a meeting that Romero would remember a few years later when Savini tried to pitch himself as the makeup artist for Night of the Living Dead. You know, we talked about that last week, where he's walking around set showing Romero his portfolio, going, I can be the guy to do this. And of course, we also know that partnership never came to be because Savini ended up going to Vietnam.
Yeah, so Romero talks about that movie. He said, I think I was just too caught up in Bergman movies at the time or something. And
yeah, he it's definitely referred to as Bergman-esque.
Yeah, he says it was like really high-minded movie about teens in the Middle Ages. He's like, I don't really know what was going to happen there, but he was like
thrilling.
But when Savini auditioned, he said that Savini was like a good-looking guy. Like he was like, he's going to be the lead. They weren't even thinking of him for makeup later.
Savini's stint in Vietnam is sort of a thing of legend, mostly because Savini himself really likes to talk about it in pretty much every interview you see with him. But I mean, it's with good reason, because he saw some traumatizing shit. He often points out that the shit that he saw helped him create some of the most realistic gore effects to ever be put to film, because he had the real deal to compare it to. He often will say, I saw this stuff in Vietnam. I saw what a dead body actually looks like. So I can recreate that better than someone who is just imagining.
The few stories I've gotten my father to tell me about his time over there are horrifying, in a word.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like I may have talked about it before, but yeah, he's been on like The Last Drive-In a couple of times, I think, now and stuff. But yeah, I remember somebody asked him like, what are some of the tricks? And he's just like, I remember his like go-to was like, yeah, well, first thing, nobody's mouth is shut when they're dead. Mouths are like,
he always talks about
open.
the jaw.
He's like, all your muscle control is gone. So he's like, that's like day one. We're like, nobody's mouth shut when they're dead. Write that down. And that was it was just kind of interesting stuff, morbid, but
but interesting.
But it's still an interesting thing. Yeah.
So Savini wasn't drafted to Vietnam like a lot of people at the time were. He actually enlisted in the Army in order to make a little bit of money, because he had a pregnant girlfriend, and he being a good Catholic boy, thought he should marry her. So he wanted to make a little bit of money, and the only way he could really do that was by enlisting in the Army. So he knew that by enlisting rather than being drafted, that he would have his choice of Army schooling. Whereas if you were drafted, you were basically sent right to the infantry. So he chose to go to the Army School of Photography, thinking, what the hell would they need photographers for in Vietnam? And then, of course, in the next few months, he was called up to go to Vietnam to be a combat photographer. And he spent an entire year there. Here's what he would recall about his time over in Vietnam.
When I was in Vietnam, I was a combat photographer. My job was to shoot images of damage to machines and to people. Through my lens, I saw some hideous stuff. To cope with it, I guess I tried to think of it as special effects. Now, as an artist, I just think of creating the effect within the limitations we have to deal with.
I'm glad that Tom Savini's still alive, and unfortunately George Romero's passed, so he can't be offended with my impersonation of him.
Oh man! So after his stint in the Army, he actually moved to Fayetteville, North Carolina. I think he was stationed there at first, but then when he wrapped things up in the Army, he stayed there, continued to hone his skills as both a makeup effects artist and as an actor. He appeared on stage in a lot of plays and musicals. I mean, this is like a 7-year period of time where he's continuing to act and be on stage, and he would often do the makeup for these plays and musicals as well. It was during this time that he tells a story in his book. He randomly just met a dude in a bar, a guy named Forrest Carpenter, who was an art director. He was an art director on movies, and he had just worked on a film called Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things, which was one of the first films directed by Bob Clark, who, of course, would go on to do Black Christmas and Porky's and A Christmas Story and all kinds of stuff. But they were actually gearing up to make another movie. These movies are being shot in Florida. That movie, Bob Clark's next movie, would end up being Tom Savini's very first film, which is a film called Death Dream. And he was not the head of the makeup department, but he assisted the makeup effects supervisor, a guy named Alan Ormsby. And then he would later on, his next movie would be another film with this same crew with Bob Clark and Ormsby called Deranged. And it would be a few years before he got another makeup effects job. And in the interim, he continued to act on stage, returned to Pittsburgh, eventually and enrolled as a student at Carnegie Mellon, and where he's like 10 years older than every other student there who are all just out of high school. He was in his late 20s. But it was during this time, this stint at Carnegie Mellon, where he finally teamed up with George Romero when the two in 1976 collaborated on Martin.
George Romero tells the story that like he literally did not remember Savini at this point, and that he said that Savini literally came off the elevator and what they were in an office building, and he was with some other people and they were talking, and Savini walked up and pulled out a razor blade and slit his wrist and just started gushing blood and did a somersault and like fell on the ground and then looked up and was like, "Remember me?" And Romero's like, I don't. But that's really impressive.
Yeah, and that I've heard that story as well. The story I heard was Savini walked into his office to do that. That's a much better version of it. But yeah, he walked in and cut his wrist, which of course is the first Savini effect that we see in this film. So the first Savini effect in the first movie that George Romero did with Savini is a wrist being cut. You know, but the story I heard was that he did it in Romero's office, and Christine Forrest was in there with Romero and nearly fainted because she just saw a guy burst in the office and slit his wrist.
Yeah, that may be accurate. I mean, this was from that Del Toro and Romero story. Romero's telling the story and says he like just walked in, cut his wrist, and did a somersault. And was like, "Hey, remember me?"
The somersault is what does it for me.
Well, it helps because in Martin, Savini does a lot of the stunts as well.
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
So I guess he's just showing like I'm multi-talented.
Yes, I can act. I can fall downstairs. I can slit my wrist. Yeah.
Right.
So, but he did not initially try to come on as the creator of the film's effects. He actually initially wanted to be an actor in the film. He approached Romero about auditioning for the lead role, only to find out that John Amplas had already been cast. So instead, he got the opportunity, of course, as we know, to do the film's makeup effects. He did get cast in the film, but obviously not as Martin. He plays a pretty small role as Arthur. I mean, an important role, I would say, but a pretty small role. So we do get to see him in the film. But yes, as Gary said, he did perform a lot of the stunts in the film as well, which I didn't realize that Savini was a stuntman until I started researching this. But apparently this is not the first time he's done that. He's done a lot of stunts, especially like motorcycle work and stuff, because he's a big motorcycle guy, as we'll see in next week's film.
Yeah, I always knew like him and Kane Hodder were like really close buds. I just assumed just because of the horror background, but
like seeing each other at horror conventions,
right? But they're apparently both like into lifting weights and getting themselves wrecked on movie sets. So I don't know,
just getting fucked up on movie sets. Oh man! So I don't know. Martin never received the like following of some of Romero's better known films, namely his zombie movies. I mean, I kind of understand that to an extent because this is essentially an art house take on the vampire tale, the kind of thing that wasn't really made in the 70s, at least not in America. Although I could see this coming out now and probably have an A24 logo.
I was literally about to say that same thing.
Beginning of it.
Like A24 made a vampire movie.
And I feel like based on y'all's previous comments that we are going to disagree on this, but I really think this is an excellent movie. I watched it twice this week, actually, because I wanted to absorb it a little bit better, because I'd never seen Martin before we did this series. So I wanted to absorb it a little bit more by watching it twice. I watched it again last night. I understand why it's not as fun as some of Romero's other stuff. Obviously, Dawn of the Dead is a cartoon at times, but even Dawn of the Dead, which has a pie fight in it, some silly stuff, it's also filled with a kind of insurmountable dread. That's something that is actually a through line through a lot of George Romero's filmography. As fun as we, think of Dawn, like Day of the Dead is a fucking bummer of a movie, Night of the Living Dead is, for a good portion of its runtime. We think of the fun stuff, but there's a lot of pathos throughout Romero's filmography. And this movie, that insurmountable dread, like permeates every frame. This is not a fun movie. It is sad. It's a sad movie about a sad man.
Well, it's sad, especially because like it's real, and that's the really big bummer of the whole thing. Is like, I think when you see Romero talk about the movie, to him, I don't think he ever looked at Martin as this is a kid that really is a vampire. I think he leaves.
Oh, he says on the DVD commentary for this, I actually have the quote. He says, "I don't think he's a vampire. I just think he's messed up."
So I think in terms of the realism and terror and just uneasy feelings in this movie are really perfectly personified in trying to get someone to hang up the goddamn phone.
Dude,
Like,
that scene.
that scene went on for fucking ever.
Are you
It's
kidding?
like,
That's
oh my God.
That's wait.
What are you doing?
That's the best scene in the movie.
Oh my God.
That whole sequence, are you kidding me? You don't like that sequence? The cat and mouse of that sequence?
No.
God damn it. Todd, you're fired from the show.
It was funny though.
Hang up. My foot's on it. No, hang up. What's the number? No, hang up.
Oh my God, Todd.
No, my foot. No, wait. The number. Is there another phone? Is there another phone in the house? Yeah, there's another phone in the house. Okay, well, hang up.
That's the thing is, and that entire sequence, that's the movie's big set piece, where Martin comes to the home of an intended victim and things get complicated because he wasn't expecting her to be cheating on her husband. The way that Romero shoots that scene, the way that he edits that scene is masterful because it is incredibly choreographed, that entire sequence. It's unnerving, it's suspenseful, but it's also very funny. Until it's not funny anymore and shit gets real. That's what's so good about that sequence is that Romero makes the audience run the gamut of emotions because the scene like that you're talking about with the phone is very funny, but it's intentionally so. Romero's catching you off guard by then making it go like shit gets really real towards the end of that scene. And the whole sequence is one of the best edited sequences in a Romero film that I've seen.
You know what's funny is like there's nothing about this movie that I think I watch and I think like Romero's not a good filmmaker. Like I think it's a well put together movie. I think it moves like God help me. My wife says this all the time. She's like, "You're slow as molasses in winter." I always thought that was the dumbest phrase, but that's accurate here. Like I feel like this movie is just really slow. There's a lot of things I like.
It's a drama. It's not an action movie. He's not trying to make an action movie.
Yeah, I just mean, I can't even imagine that he had like 2.5 hours out of this. Like, I mean, I can't imagine because part of one of the things about this movie is that makes it so damn depressing is that it's like real life. Like, oh, I'm literally spending 3 hours in this dude's life or something. I mean, I know you're spending it over time, but there's cool parts, right? Like, so I'm torn because there's stuff I really dig. And I've seen stuff with Romero that he was thinking about all the weird shit that a lot of people bring up when you start thinking about vampire stuff. As far as he wanted to see, like, is there something like, what would it be like to be a modern vampire? And then thinking about like, oh man, you know, there's like weird monotonous things you would have to do. Like you got to get your license renewed, like over and over again for 90 years. Like, you know, like he's like, that's where it started is like, you're just like the mundane part of being a vampire, like the weird stuff you'd have to deal with. And so I feel like he, you know, he's still trying to capture this, although he ends up going into this territory of like, this kid's like, to me, you can obviously watch it. And the kid's obviously some mentally disturbed kid, and it's based on his environment. He's in a society that's crumbling. Things are crumbling all around him. And he just so happens to have a great uncle who's a relic from the past. He's like also helping feed his weird hallucinations that he's a vampire. And so they roll with it. Although I will say, by the way, that I do feel like there's breadcrumbs in there somewhere. Like if you really want to play with it, there's the stuff about like, go look in the photo albums, you know, or whatever. And
well, that's the thing is that Romero, despite what he says in like that DVD commentary, he makes it, he puts things in the film that would give you evidence both ways, whether Martin's actually a vampire or whether he's delusional. And I think that's really funny because Romero has often kind of hesitated to give meaning to his films. He'd rather the audience figure it out for themselves. He doesn't really, you can put a lot of social commentary attached to his films, as we talk about a lot with his movies, but he never really talks about that, which I like. I like that he allows the audience to figure it out. And he seems to be intentionally doing that with this movie, like giving you clues that yes, Martin could actually be a vampire, or he could actually just be a messed up kid, And one thing I think that he does that's so impressive is that he somehow manages to get the audience to empathize with Martin, without ever really being on his side. He's despicable. He's a horrible human, whether he's a vampire or not. He's a horrible human. And I think a lot of that also, Romero gets a lot of credit, but I think John Amplas should get a lot of credit for that as well, because I think he plays the role very well. But a lot of the movie does hinge on that question: is Martin a vampire or not? Maybe he's feeding to the delusions of Tate Kuda, his cousin, his old ass cousin. Regardless, if he's not a vampire, then he's just a rapist and serial killer. And this is something that Romero establishes in the very first scene in the movie, where he murders a woman. He premeditatively, he fills a syringe, he's on the hunt, and he murders a woman in cold blood on a train. So even if he's not a vampire, then he's just a fucked up serial killer, what she call a freak rapist asshole.
Well, it's funny, like we were that's not funny, but we were talking like during the movie, the wife and I, like, where later on she was like, oh, his I guess it's his cousin, not his uncle, but it's like his cousin's so mean to him, and it's like, what if he's not, he might not really be a vampire? And I'm like, yeah, but he's still definitely, like, we definitely saw him murder a lady at the beginning of this movie. Like, yeah,
he's still
her blood.
He's still not sympathetic, yet you empathize with him because mostly because of Amplas' performance, because he plays him as a sad, lonely dude who seems to be like when he kills that woman at the beginning, which is a great sequence, a very unnerving sequence, and another, I think, instance that proves how good of an editor George Romero is in that sequence. Because you have to remember, Romero cut his teeth editing 30-second commercials where he had to tell a whole story in 30 seconds. So he got very, very good at it. But in that scene, when he's killing the woman, he's even, he's cradling her like a child, as she's passing out. He's saying, I don't want to hurt you. I always prepare the needles well. Like he's taking care, almost like he doesn't want to do this, but he has to do this, which helps the audience to sympathize with him. And again, not be on his side, but understand that he is a somewhat sympathetic character despite how fucked up he is.
Yeah, it's weird. I'm glad you went back to John Amplas, because I think he is what makes anything work. Obviously Romero's part in it, and there's everybody involved. So there's the crew, but John Amplas, like I can't
the entire cast and crew. Yes, let's not forget them.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I can't imagine anybody else but John Amplas in the role. Like he just has this weird innocence about his face, and like he does have a unique look that, like, there's something about Martin being like a younger looking guy.
Yeah, and Amplas was like 27 when he made this, but he's playing either an 84-year-old or a 19-year-old, depending on who you believe.
Depending on what you buy into. And it's weird because I don't know this guy. I don't know Amplas at all. And I don't just mean personally. I just don't know him from movies, really.
He hasn't done much. He's done some other stuff in Romero movies. He'll appear at the opening sequence of Dawn of the Dead, which we'll talk about next week, as a Puerto Rican with like a Che Guevara mustache and in brown face. And then he plays like I think one of the scientists maybe in Day of the Dead.
Yeah, I think he's back for Day.
He plays in Creep Show, the Father's Day sequence. He's the father that coming out of the grave.
Oh, nice.
Obviously, you can't see his face, but that's him.
Oh,
but
weird.
yeah, but he mostly stayed in Pittsburgh doing plays and teaching acting,
which is so crazy because I read around about the time I can't remember if it was like right before or right after, whenever it would have been. He traveled to Rome to audition for Argento and Suspiria, and he didn't.
Really?
Yeah, and he didn't. He like he ended up like close, but didn't get the part. And and then he came
Wonder
back
what role?
Yeah, I don't know.
Who is he?
But I just remember reading that somewhere that he had auditioned there. But it's just weird. And then now, like he's kind of been quiet.
Well, I mean, I think that may be a personal choice though too as well. I'm not sure why, because I think he's actually very good in this. I think another thing that Romero does that was a great choice is those black and white scenes, like juxtaposing those into the film, because it kind of feeds into that question of whether or not Martin is a vampire or not, because those scenes could be his fantasies, or they could be memories from years and years ago, because he's supposedly old.
Well, I think they play into that, like in that very first scene, because he's imagining her on the bed welcoming him,
right?
And then it doesn't turn out to be that.
No, she's like taking a shit.
Yeah,
and then comes out with her face mask on, and
of course, to his delusion, like he would definitely like picture it like an old vampire movie or something,
where she's opening, like she's like a bride of Dracula, and
right, it'd be black and white, and it's like that whole thing. So it makes sense.
So as Romero often does, in his movies, he does inject a healthy dose of social commentary into this movie as well. In this case, it's sort of a depiction of that suburban town, Braddock, Pennsylvania, in this case, that seems to be in like an economic depression. It's a shitty town. Like everything is falling apart and decaying, and it's filled with residents who want to get out. Like you've got Christina, which is we mentioned before, is played by Christine Forrest, Romero's future wife. She talks about wanting to get away. She so much that she's willing to go with her boyfriend Arthur, which is the role that Tom Savini plays, who is wanting to leave to look for better work that pays better. And she even says, like, I'm going to leave with Arthur and we're not going to end up together. He's just my way out of this shithole of a town. Like, that's how desperate she is to get away from this place. And Martin, even he seems like he's this kid, we've all known this kid or been this kid, like this kid who's 19 years old and does not know, he has no direction in life. Like he's just wandering from one town to the next. No real family. It's an image that we've all seen, or a person that we've all known.
I thought you were going to talk about like injecting women and bleeding them.
I don't know anyone that, to my knowledge, has done that.
I haven't done that in years. So,
well, I got to ask. So, what do you got? I mean, Gary, I think you may have already said what you think, but based on the film, like as you were watching it, before doing any research or anything about what Romero thinks, did you view the movie as, and this is a question for both of you guys, did you view the movie as Martin being a vampire or Martin thinking he was a vampire?
I just thought it was like George Romero trying to take a new approach to the vampire mythos. Like I didn't.
But do you see Martin as a creature of magic?
No, I don't. I think he was a messed up kid, and I feel like the movie. I can tell that he's trying to give you both sides of the story, but for the most part, I felt like it feels pretty obvious that like this is a kid who's just in an environment that he's like believing in fantasy of something else, and like he's obviously got some other sort of psychotic break that's happening within him, but he's combining it with this fantasy of being a horror movie villain or something, like he's the vampire. And so he believes this. Now, I mean, there's cool stuff in it. Don't get me wrong. I mean, what I like about it is that Romero talks about that during this time, or maybe it wasn't even Romero, but I was thinking about this, like Hammer movies had come along, you'd had the Universal monsters and Hammer movies, like do vampires, but vampires had almost become like a little bit of a joke, like it become a little more silly around this time. And so it is a little sad that Martin doesn't get more credit, because there's been a lot of iterations of like what the vampire story is now, but this is not normally considered part of that discussion. And it probably should be, because George Romero saw like a different version of this tale.
He was doing a different version of the vampire before like Lost Boys and Near Dark and stuff like that came along.
Exactly. Yeah. He was trying to tell like a different version of this story. And you can still, I mean, the argument's there on whether or not he was a vampire, but I kind of still looked at it like, is this, and especially when you get quotes like you said earlier, where Romero's telling like, you know, like they're all just like parts of ourselves or whatever, you know, he said it better than I did, but it's an interesting story where this kid believes he's a vampire and his family sort of believes it, or he's stuck in this position where like some of his family believes it. And he keeps saying that there's no magic, but he's talking.
Yeah, magic isn't real. Yeah.
Yeah. But he's talking to this radio host, like he's reaching out to like this radio host all the time and talking to him about it. And I don't know. I'm going a long way to answer your question. No, I don't believe he's a vampire. I do believe that you could make the argument otherwise. And at the end, he gets killed with a stake through the heart.
But does he get murdered or does he get destroyed?
Which, oddly enough, would kill anybody. Really,
yeah, exactly.
So
that's
Todd,
not
really an answer.
Todd, as you were watching the movie, did you see him as a true vampire, or did you see him as a delusional kid?
I saw him as a fairly well practiced serial killer. Like he had the steps and the plan.
And he talks about he talks in that first scene about perfecting the injection.
Yeah. So if there was supposed to be a confusion or a discussion about is he or isn't he, I don't think the film properly instilled that within me. I saw him as a serial killer with vampire leanings, but there was never, and I think that's the thing is like all of this sort of leads to him ironically being staked, which Gary said would kill anybody. But at the point where he sort of abandons killing and the vampire thing and falls in love, the lady kills herself. He gets blamed for it and staked. And I think that's what we're watching. We're watching this ironic downward progression. You know, there's a little bit of redemption of like, hey, this weird kid found love and like maybe this is what he needed to become, you know, a real live boy. But ironically, it ended up being his downfall because he was falsely accused and then staked. On paper, this looks like a really great little cautionary tale about, you know,
don't murder women. Yes.
Yeah. Don't murder women because you'll get accused and staked. No, but it's sort of like it's a cautionary tale about the actions you have consequences, whether you intend them or not. Even after you correct your, you know, turn from your evil ways, there are still consequences to be had. Now, how well was that message conveyed in the film?
I just think part of the interesting part of it is like you're watching it and then it's like if you look at Martin and then what's his name? Kuda? Is that his name?
Tatsukuda.
Yeah.
Tatsukuda. You're like, one of these guys is real fucking crazy. Turns out both are crazy.
Both of them are real fucking crazy. I think he is just a mentally unstable kid, which is what I later found out is what Romero thought as well. And I think that he's a kid who was probably already mentally unstable, who has been further corrupted by his family's extreme superstitious beliefs. None of us that live in the Bible Belt can possibly relate to that. But I believe that he thinks he's a vampire. That's the thing. I believe that he truly believes that he's a vampire, but he is actually just as human as you or me. And I do think that could also be another bit of social commentary that Romero is trying to put into the film. This idea that there's a harmful impact of like these psychological and emotional scars that our families can inflict upon us. You know, things that you don't realize when you're a kid that when you later find out, like oh, that was fucked up, and you're still dealing with that baggage, and that's basically because that's basically what's happening to him. He may have already had some mental issues, some that he was more predisposed to this, but by a family constantly telling you this is what you are, that's what you're going to become. Yeah. And that's what I think that's part of what Romero is trying to say here.
For Martin, it was either this or, I don't know, get into stand-up comedy.
Oh man, which is worse? Honestly, which is worse?
I have had my worldview blown. That I used to pick on. One of the things I used to pick on Twilight, and there's plenty, but one of the things I used to pick on Twilight for is like the idea that these are vampires. The daylight doesn't really affect them; they just sparkle. And I'm like, now I look back on them, I'm like, well, at least they sparkle. Like that's something that at least adheres to. I used to think there were like unwritten rules that you couldn't screw with in vampires. And now I've seen Martin. And the other day I watched, spoiler alert, everybody, I'm going to mention a movie here called Let's Scare Jessica to Death. But I watched that the other day. And both those movies there's some vampire stuff going on. And daylight does not matter. And so it's just, I don't know. It's just interesting.
I think one thing I think the ambiguity of whether Martin's a vampire or not is actually very important to the overall impact of the film, because I do think that if we knew, like in Romero's original version, if we knew that Martin was a vampire, then he sort of becomes an object of myth. He's no longer just like a dude. And I think that sort of allows the audience to forgive his crimes. I think that allows the audience to think, oh, that's just what vampires do.
Right.
That's not just what people do, or not what people should be doing is murdering each other.
How jacked up is it, though, that you feel like when Savini or whatever her name is, I'm sorry, when she kills herself. His MILF. She kills herself.
She's not a MILF because she talks about not being able to have children. But
Good point.
She's just a hot mom.
I'm not even going to try to pretend to work out the acronym for whatever that would be. But she kills herself, and you kind of feel bad for him. And then you're like, also like, well, he would have probably done that eventually. Like, I'm guessing.
The thing is, he never seems to see her as a victim. Same with his cousin Christine. He never sees her as a victim. It doesn't seem like they're just
that's a good point.
Other women in his life.
Well, he identifies with her. She's dealing with a not exactly the same type of loneliness, but a very similar,
she's not in a great relationship.
Just as strong type of loneliness as he is.
Yeah. Yeah. And she wants to get out of this life and find something better as well. I mean,
right.
So Michael Weldon, you guys heard of that? Michael Weldon. Do you know who that is? The writer of the Psychotronic.
I heard a podcast one time talking about him.
It was pretty good. I don't know what happened to it, but he in his review,
he's a dickhead.
In his review in the encyclopedia, the Psychotronic Encyclopedia of Film, he called Martin, there's a quote, too disturbing, bleak, and personal to have been a financial hit, even at midnight showings. And he was right. It did not make a lot of money. It received a very limited release on May 10th, 1978. And it wasn't by any stretch of the imagination a financial success, although it has gone on to be revered by horror fans over the years and as sort of one of Romero's unsung masterpieces. Despite what you guys think, a lot of people in the horror community absolutely love this movie. And Romero himself has called it his favorite movie he ever did.
All I've said about this movie thus far is that it felt like 3 hours. And I stand by that. This movie
is an insult.
This movie, well, it did. This movie is very slow. And if you want, here's the thing. If we're talking about movies and we're going to sit here and try to pretend all day long that this is a great horror movie. Well, that depends on what you're looking for out of the horror movie.
I think this is a character drama with horror elements to it.
Yeah, this is not like
watch it as a horror movie. Is this going to scare me? This is not that kind of movie.
This is not a standard vampire movie. This is a drawn out character drama, like Justin just said. That's what this movie is. I don't think it's a bad movie. I just mean it's slow. It's a drawn out, slowly paced, intentionally so.
It's kind of like Joker. It's a character study. It's not a superhero movie.
Okay. I mean, I see where you're
see
going.
Where
with
you're
that.
going with that, yeah.
Just
like
as a comparison for someone who is it's a 70s, think 70s Joker, but instead of Joker, it's vampires. It's a character.
And especially if you're
study.
living in a world where George Romero as the Living Dead guy, like this is a more thoughtful piece than you might be expecting. Like, I mean, I think there's some cool performances in it. I think that the story is interesting, and it's interesting that in 1977 a movie came out that tackled the vampire mythos with like a lot of interesting perspective. It does have all of that. I'm not going to take it back. I think it's slow. I don't think it's bad. It's really slow, well done.
Saying I think it's slow I mean, you did say you thought it was intentionally slow. I think it's methodic. I think it's intentionally paced. So to me, when somebody says something is slow, the movie is slow, that's them saying the movie is boring. Yeah. And that's not necessarily always the same thing.
I guess I would have established that it is that way just because I think that if you go into this movie with the expectation that you're watching a horror movie, or the expectation that you're at least even watching a Night of the Living Dead style movie, or Dawn of the Dead, or Day of the Dead, or whatever, like that could lead to disappointment. This is not that same kind of movie. This is and especially if you see like George Romero and Tom Savini are in it. I mean, the gore is pretty limited in this movie. Like it
is. I mean, you've got that opening, like the slit wrist. You've got, of course, the guy in the house getting like stabbed in his neck or chest, right. And the end where Martin
there's the ending. But I mean, all in all, this is pretty tame.
I mean, from a horror, if you're watching this as a traditional horror movie, I could totally see that, but that's not what Romero was trying to do. You got to remember, like, Romero did not intend to be a horror movie director. He made a horror movie because he knew it would make money, and he essentially got kind of pigeonholed in that for the rest of his career, which he never really wanted to do. I mean, we hear that story a lot. Even Wes Craven tried to get out of it for a little bit, but Romero, and even in this movie, like he loves horror movies. He grew up loving horror movies, but he's taking those elements of those horror movies and putting them into a character drama, which is what this is. It's what Season of the Witch is, his previous movie. It's not a horror movie, despite there being witchcraft in it, not remotely a horror movie. He's just taking horror elements and injecting them into a drama.
Yeah, I just feel like a lot of audience, I mean, despite the fact that like some people could be super smart and super artsy and they like will just immediately like get it. Like granted, I probably did for like a movie like Midsummer, for example. Like Midsummer, I felt it like immediately. I was like, this movie works for me. But it's like, if you settle down and you're like, I need to watch a good like scary horror movie, and you picked Martin, you're like, Romero, Savini, vampire, like this is gonna be great. You're gonna be, I feel like a lot of 7 out of 10 times people are gonna be like, that is not what I expected out of that.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean it's bad. That just means
I'm just saying. I mean, that doesn't mean it's bad. It just means like I think that people have to have the proper expectation that can impact their view of the film.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So we've mentioned Savini here in the last few minutes more, and I guess you could say that the most significant thing to come out of this movie was that partnership with Tom Savini and George Romero. And we'll explore this. We're going to be spending the next several weeks exploring this, and because that is a partnership that grew from this film that would span decades and give us some of the best horror movies ever made. But there was actually one other connection, a very important one that was made with this film, and that was George Romero's working relationship with Dario Argento. Because Argento, as he would often do with American-made horror movies, is he bought the rights to Martin to distribute the film in Europe. And his agreement, as it often would be that he would have the ability to re-edit the film for the European market and, of course, have the Italian prog rock band Goblin provide the score for the film. And that was released in Europe under the name Vampire. And to this day, you can't find it. It's never been released in America that I could find. To this day, you can only find an Italian dubbed version of that if you like import it from Europe. So I've never seen it, unfortunately. I would like to, although I have heard from people who have seen it that the Argento version is inferior because of, like we said, one of the big strengths of this film is how well Romero edits it. And by Argento re-editing it like it's a giallo or something, it kind of takes away a lot of the melancholy. I mean, adding a goblin score automatically is going to make it less melancholy.
I was just picturing it, like all of like the subtle scenes, or like even the like serious discussions or anything, and like, you want me for the sex, don't you?
Then you just hear I mean, I want to see it, but I can't imagine it would be the same film by any stretch of the imagination. But that partnership with Romero is something that would benefit Romero's next film, because Romero and Argento made a very similar deal with that film, which is that Argento would have the ability to re-edit the film and have Goblin do a score to it. And in exchange, Argento would provide a bunch of money to help get the film made. And in fact, it was Argento's money. The Italian money was some of the first money that they raised for that film. That film, of course, the one that we're going to be talking about next week, the second film in George Romero's zombie saga, 1978's Dawn of the Dead. So I'm pretty excited to talk about it. Hope you guys are as well.
And it turns out it's super easy to find.
Hey, maybe not. Depends on when you're listening to this episode.
I was
You
going
could
to
be
say,
listening to this from years. So
what version are we watching?
I'm going to say the theatrical
remake.
cut. Although no, I mean I like the remake, but no. So I'm going to say the theatrical cut just for ease. Although I may watch the Argento cut as well because I like that version too, and I've got both. So I might, if I have time, I might watch them both. But I would say the original theatrical cut probably. But the movie as of this recording is not very easy to find, but we always put a link in our on our website where you can find all the show notes on this episode on our website, cinemashock.net. We have a new website. Well, we have a website. We didn't have one last week when we recorded, but we do now. Cinemashock.net. We'll have a little link to justwatch.com, the profile for Dawn of the Dead. So maybe if you're listening to this down the line, it is available streaming somewhere. As of right now, it's not, but
it's a goddamn shame it's not.
It's really weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's really weird. And the DVD and Blu-rays are like out of print. So it's very, very hard to find right now.
That's what I was going to go do, is just like, well, I'll just use this as an excuse to go buy it on Blu-ray, but
nope, you won't. I mean, you can. You're going to spend some money on it.
Yeah. You really just go with the DVD, the regular DVD right now on Amazon, or I mean, we hate doing this, but YouTube's your friend too.
We're not going to promote piracy on our podcast, Gary.
I'm just saying, Google some stuff sometimes.
As a supporter of independent filmmakers, I am not.
Do you honestly think the George Romero Foundation has anything to do with anything going on Amazon right now, where a copy of Dawn of the Dead is like $180 if you want to buy like the special edition Blu-ray?
I'm just saying, if somebody's listening to this in a year and the Blu-ray's out, I'm not going to promote piracy.
Well, I hope they've done their job and they got it off YouTube, because it's there right now. I'm not going to promote it. I'm just saying you could, and you shouldn't, because you should buy the Blu-ray.
Look,
thanks, Gary.
Go watch it on YouTube and then donate some money to the George Romero
Foundation. Yeah,
is there
George
an actual
Romero Foundation? Yeah, we're following them on Twitter. I've been interacting with them.
You know how much you're willing to spend on a copy of the original Dawn of the Dead. Go watch it on YouTube and then donate that money to the George A. Romero Foundation.
That is an idea that you could consider. Justin wants no part of any of this.
No, he doesn't.
I specifically told you don't watch it on YouTube. Don't watch it on YouTube because it's free and right there. So do not do that. You want to buy the movie. Go spend $180 on Amazon right now and buy whatever Blu-ray they got.
It's only $75.
I'm sure that George Romero's poor wife gets all $180
No,
when you do it.
There are used versions of it for like $8-9 on Amazon.
All right.
The Blu-ray?
No, the DVD.
I was about to say the DVD you can get. If you want the Blu-ray, it's like stupid money.
Yeah, the DVD is like $9. You can get it for like $9. So just go buy that. Just to do that.
I'm glad we all had this discussion.
Anyway, that's what we got about Martin. That's it. That was our episode on Martin. Thank you for joining us, Todd.
I'm really disappointed in all of us for not having fake vampire teeth in the whole time.
Oh man, that's a fun scene in this movie, honestly. Where Martin pretends to be a vampire just to fuck with his uncle or his cousin.
Right.
Puts on the cape and the fangs, and it's fun. Fun shit.
Yeah.
Anyway, Todd hated this movie. Can you tell how much Todd hated this movie?
Yeah. Well,
I really do want to be positive. And I feel like on paper, the idea is great. But if they remade Crazies, I think this deserves a modern telling. Like tighten up the script a little bit, get some people who are actors, not just people who own the house, to play these roles. And
John Amplas is great. Christine Forrest is great. Tatsukude is great.
I'm going to fall in the middle. I'll be in the middleman here and say that I could definitely see a way that like a Blumhouse could put this thing together.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying that a remake couldn't be good. I'm just saying that I have no issue with the performances in this film.
No, I mean, like I said, I can't imagine John Amplas, anybody other than that, doing the role. But I mean, you really heighten that like
come on,
confusion
Gary,
on whether or not he is or isn't. Like, I mean, there could be some fun there.
Gary, you can think of a couple people that could probably do just as good, if not better, than Amplas in a modern retelling.
He's good. He's good in this. And Todd, I have a feeling Todd is not going to like a lot of the movies we're going to be covering on this podcast.
I keep waiting for you to have the thing of like Todd hates horror. Like, when are we going to do that series?
That's this whole podcast now.
Oh, God damn
That's
it.
exactly what we're doing.
That's this entire podcast now. It's
Cinema shocker my ass. Like, just call it Todd hates horror.
Oh, we'll cinema shocker that ass.
They're not all horror movies. You're gonna hate westerns. You're gonna hate kung fu movies. It's just Todd hates movies.
Todd hates movies.
That is what this podcast
Todd hates
is.
movies that aren't the Ninja Turtles.
Yeah, you just wait. Like Todd, I think Todd's gonna like Dawn of the Dead. Because everyone likes Dawn of the Dead.
I've seen Dawn of the Dead. I love Dawn of the Dead.
Okay,
we'll see.
Not the Zack Snyder one, the George Romero one.
I know the original. The original.
Todd is not. I'm going to go ahead and predict in 2 weeks we're going to be talking about a film called Effects. Todd is not going to like that movie. That movie cost $16 to make. Todd is filled with amateurs. Todd is not going to like it.
Oh God!
That's my prediction. Let's see where we land in 2 weeks.
All right,
He's gonna like it on purpose now.
That should be our Gary. What we're gonna do going forward? Me and Gary are gonna have private conversations without Todd.
Oh my God! And we'll do like private bets on if Todd.
And we're gonna write it down on a piece of paper and fold it, and not unfold it until we're doing the episode of yes or no. Will Todd like this movie?
I like this.
And unveil it during the episode to see if we were right.
At the end, when Todd gives his opinion, we have to like unfold it. It's like the dating game. Did Todd like this movie?
It's gotta be in the envelope, and you have to do it all so nothing below the camera. It's all gonna be on camera.
Sealed. Yeah, we're anyway, Gary, you want to tell people where you can be found on the internet?
I am at This Is Gary Horne.
I'm Justin_Bishop everywhere. Mr. Todd A. Davis.
On Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
Letterboxd.
Still
using it?
Yeah, and D&D Beyond.
I'm sorry?
I don't know what that is.
What was that?
D&D Beyond?
Is that a Dungeons and Dragons thing?
It is.
Is it like online Dungeons and Dragons?
Yes.
I mean, I feel like that should be invented by now, but
yeah,
apparently it is.
Yeah,
it's D&D Beyond.
Yeah.
Mr. Todd A. Davis, follow him, I guess. I don't know. Do you follow people?
Go find him. Go start a quest or whatever the hell it is.
Yeah, of course.
Find the podcast everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can find links to all those on our website or probably in the show description, wherever you're listening to this podcast right now. And until next week,
may the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
Be excellent to each other. Oh, did you see the new Bill and Ted?
Hell yeah, I did.
Oh, have you seen it, Todd?
The trailer?
No, the movie, the fucking movie.
It's out? I thought it wasn't out
on Friday.
yet.
Well, as we're recording this, it came out on Friday. Friday the 29th. Yes, 29th, I think.
I'm not going to the theater just yet, but
it's not in the theater.
It's video on demand, Todd. None of us went to the theater.
What
We're all in the
planet
middle
do you
of a
live
pandemic.
on? What planet do you live on, Todd?
No.
VOD. $24.99, and you own the movie.
Oh no.
No, it's
I'll wait.
Worth every penny.
I'm sure.
Or if you have a nice friend who's willing to loan it to you, then there you go.
$24.99, worth every penny. It is a goddamn delight.
No.
And it is the
I think honestly,
it is the shot of joy that we all need in 2020 right now.
It is very joyful. It's very positive and
I'm
just
down
feel good.
I'm down to see it, but I've got some stuff to do.
Nothing more important.
Todd, do you have a closing quote so we can end this episode and not bring anybody down?
Yeah, Johnny has the keys.
Wait, you can't do that every week.
Sure can. I sure can, motherfucker.
Oh, God.
How's that for a slice of fried gold?
Why don't we just wait here for a while? See what happens.
There's no more room in hell. The dead will walk again. You're gonna need a bigger motion. We'll tear your soul apart. I'd buy that for $1.
I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brain.
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?